Hey guys. I think I'm covering the mic. Shit. Can you guys hear me? It's me, Seren, back with another video, another car video, which I know you guys love. I think we're gonna have actually probably a lot of car videos this week. Because I'm really busy this week. Because I went to New York over the weekend. I went to New York over the weekend for the book signing, which was awesome. And then I'm going to New York again this coming weekend to film for the panel for the Grapevine, which I'm super excited about, to be filming with the Grapevine again because it's been a while. And it's also about to be Black History Month, and I think I want to try to do a daily vlog challenge. So I'm going to be trying to like film videos for every day in February. But then there's like also like a ton of stuff just like going on, and I just like don't have enough time to like, especially with like all this traveling that I'm doing and like all the other videos that I have planned, I just don't have enough time to like sit down and like record in front of the camera and like edit in front of the camera. So I think it's gonna be a lot of car videos probably this week. So I wanted to make this video talking about everything that, not everything, but a lot of stuff that kind of happened over the weekend. So for Cheeto signed this executive order banning immigrants and refugees from 7 countries. I want to say 2 or 3 of the countries on that list were African countries. I know Sudan was on the list. I know Somalia was on the list. And I think like 1 more African country was on the list. Iran was on the list. Syria, Yemen. So a few things happened, and there's like a few things that I want to talk about in that kind of things that kind of happened in response to what it was effectively a Muslim ban. Because these are, you know, predominantly Muslim countries, and the reasoning behind it was, you know, war on terror, terrorism. You know, we're not allowing these people into the United States because they're terrorists. Is the underlying, you know, message. So people immediately started to protest this. People immediately took to the streets and started protesting this. Tons and tons of people. So something that I want to get into first, something that I noticed about these protests is that there are a lot, now this is just something interesting that I noticed. There are a lot of white people protesting this, you know, Muslim ban. That these are people that would not go to like a Black Lives Matter protest, right? Like they would not get out there and like protest for Black lives, which I also find to be extremely interesting, because just like I said, like at least 2, but I think 3 of the countries on this list are African countries. And it's really funny to see, you know, people protesting what they feel is like a Muslim ban. But when you watch the news and when you get on social media and when you kind of see like the stories that are being exchanged around refugees, around Muslims, around immigrants, a lot of them are not like Black. Like there's like this weird erasure of like Black Muslims and like Black immigrants, and like there's this like really weird erasure of Black people. And we were talking about it on Twitter, and somebody on Twitter said that's because white people only protest shit based on like its proximity to whiteness. So like the images that you see circulating around, and the reason why all these people are protesting is because when they think of like a Muslim, the image that comes to mind is probably like a white passing Arab, which a lot of people were also talking about how like Muslim and Arab are not the same thing, because like black fucking Muslims exist, which I'll probably get into a little bit later on in this video. But somebody said on Twitter, you know, like, when your average person thinks of like a Muslim, they think of like a white passing Arab, or a white person, you know, like from Syria, like Steve Jobs. All, like, there were so many like Steve Jobs like memes going around, and like Apple memes and like iPhone memes. And then a lot of people are also kind of making these links and these connections between a lot of these protests and respectability, because you also had, you know, all these like posts and memes again that were like getting all this attention because they were of, again, white passing Arabs or lighter skinned Arabs, you know, Arab Muslims, saying things like, you know, I came over here to this country and I became a doctor where I save lives every day. And, you know, I came over here and I became a scientist where I, you know, did this and did that. And then you had people that were like, well, you know, even the Muslims that, you know, the black, you know, Somalian Muslims that come over here and, you know, run a corner store, they also, like, are immigrants. They also are Muslims. They're also going to be affected. They also, you know, they should not be erased, you know, like, and those are black lives. So when we say Black Lives Matter, we're talking about those people too, but you wouldn't come out and protest for those people. You're only out here protesting because, you know, of the proximity of whiteness to a lot of these, you know, mainly white passing Middle Eastern Arabs, which is what comes to mind when you think of a Muslim, right? Which is just an interesting, super interesting thing to think about, you know, what makes this, you know, palatable as something to protest, right? And I also want to say that, especially as we kind of see more and more white people getting into like the nature of protests and the way that we've kind of been doing it, there is a lot of co-opting modern black resistance like methods without any mention of Black Lives Matter, of the African Socialist Party, of the liberation of a movement for black bodies in this country. I was like seeing so much like co-opting of like our resistance methods, you know, resistance methods that really, because like when we first started protesting in Ferguson, a lot of the resistance methods, you know, a lot of our resistance methods were criticized, you know. And now here we are 3 years later, and a lot of these same methods are being co-opted by white people, but they still would not protest for black lives if it came down to it. And they're still not even giving credit where credit is due on why they even feel comfortable getting out in the streets and protesting, right? Which is like super interesting. Like there was like all this picture going around of this white person holding a sign that said protest is the new brunch. And the very first thing that came to my mind was when, you know, 3 years ago, 3 years ago, Black Lives Matter protesters were doing brunch die-ins. And I mentioned this in a video. They were doing brunch die-ins. They were like going around to brunch because they were like targeting white liberals, especially in DC. And they were doing die-ins at brunch. They would like have 30 people go to a brunch and die, lay in the middle of the floor. They were like hitting brunch spots, and they were standing there and they would read the names of black women that were killed by the police. They would go to brunch spots and they would read the names of trans women that were killed by the police. And white people were furious. They were calling the cops on these people. They were having them forcibly removed, escorted out. You know, I like looked up a bunch of old articles about it, and I had like put them on Twitter, and I had like put some screen caps, because one of the pieces from Gawker said like, oh, what, you know, you hit white liberals where it hurt them the most, like brunch. And they're talking about like, I'm just trying to have a nice brunch, and I can't believe that they're doing this here, like this is not appropriate. And now here we are 2-3 years later, and you have white people standing outside of a courthouse in DC, or standing outside of Trump Towers in New York, and they're holding a sign that says protest is the new brunch. And I said, I was like, no, maybe this is petty, like, let me know if this is petty. But I just find it really, really interesting how, you know, all of these protest actions, all these methods of resistance that were just so absurd and ridiculous 2 and 3 years ago when they were coming from black bodies, are now getting all this glowing praise now that they're coming from white bodies, right? It just feels like more appropriation of the work and emotional labor of black people, and especially black activists. And I said on Twitter, I was like, you know, as always, you know, black people kicked down the door, getting beaten and bloodied in the process, you know, and getting shitted on and hated and reviled and getting all this criticism. And then years later, white people walk through the nice hole left behind because we kicked that door in, and they get all this glowing praise. I was like, and how many think pieces about these protests are going to mention how so many of these resistance methods are being lifted from Black Lives Matter? How many? I haven't seen any mention that shit yet. And I was like, and again, like, maybe this is petty, but, you know, and I've thought about this before. And I might do a whole video on this at some point, but, like, I have, like, pages and pages written down in my notebook about how black bodies for so many people serve as this, like, never-ending well of inspiration, be it creativity, art, you know, music, you know, protest methods. You know, if you ask somebody, you know, who do they admire in terms of activism and protest, you know, what are they gonna say? They're gonna say Martin Luther King, they're gonna say James Baldwin, they're gonna say, you know, Audre Lorde, they're gonna say Bell Hooks, all these black activists, right, whose work is just like this. It's like, I think I'm gonna do a video on this, because I remember, like, when I was thinking about it and I was, like, writing stuff down, I said that, like, black bodies are like ghosts, like we're not real. You can draw on, you know, all this inspiration from black bodies, but you don't have to actually know a black person. You don't have to actually go stand and protest for black lives. You could just, you know, mine us like this never-ending resource. And I feel like I see that happening now with a lot of these protest methods. I did see some pieces that were written about the Women's March mention this. I remember I read a piece that said a lot of the signs were culturally appropriative, like black people have been saying it's lit. So a lot of, like, these white girls had signs that said, like, it's clit, you know, and they were like, and in the piece I read, they were saying how, like, you know, but then when you ask these white girls, like, oh, but have they been to any Black Lives Matter protests? Like, they'll say, oh, no, this was, like, my first protest. This was, like, the first thing that, like, moved me to protest. So, like, even still, you mining black culture, but you would not go out and protest for black bodies, right? Like Amanda Steinberg, love black culture, hate black bodies, even to the point where you love our protest methods and our resistance methods, but you wouldn't protest with us or for us. It's just, like, a really interesting, like, paradigm, right? Like, that dissonance, right? So I wanted to address that, the dissonance and the protest methods, and why so many people find it palatable, white people, of course, I'm talking about white people mainstream, find it palatable to protest, you know, this Muslim ban because of what that means in terms of, like, the stereotypical idea of a Muslim and that proximity to whiteness, and why that makes it easy to protest a Muslim ban, but not to protest for black lives, not to go to a Black Lives Matter protest, even though black Muslims exist. And I kind of want to segue into the erasure of black Muslims, the erasure of black refugees, the erasure of black immigrants. Recently, President Cheeto, you know, said that he was going to pull funding from states that from sanctuary cities that refuse to hand over their undocumented immigrants. And the very first city to fucking fold on this executive order and say we're going to fully comply in handing over undocumented immigrants was Miami, right? And a lot of people were like, oh my God, Miami is so full of immigrants. Like, I'm fucking shocked. I don't understand like why the Cuban immigrant mayor of Miami would agree to sign, would sign a document and agree to go along with handing over undocumented citizens. Like, I just don't understand. It doesn't make sense. I'm like, because they want to get rid of those Haitians. That's why. Because all those white Cubans that probably are immigrants but probably are fucking documented, they want to get rid of all those black Haitians that live in Miami. That was literally my very first thought when I saw that the mayor of Miami was complying. And everybody was so shocked. I was like, why is this shocking? I was like, all those fucking black Haitians that those Cubans hate because of the rampant anti-blackness in the Latinx community, and especially because so many Cubans are white and they identify with white supremacist values. Like, I wasn't shocked at all. And just the hate in general that Haitians get, globally around the world, where they're seen as dirty and poor and this and that, without any talk about how the fucking French literally made them that way. Like, I was like, he's trying to get rid of all those undocumented fucking Haitians. Like, duh, like wet foot, dry foot policy. Like, let the Cubans stay and send the Haitians back. They're trying to get rid of all those black people. So again, there's like this weird erasure happening with black immigrants. Excuse me. I am fighting this cold, y'all. I'm fighting it. There's like this really weird erasure happening with like black immigrants and like black refugees and like black Muslims, because when you talk about these issues, people don't think about black people. Like, I've attended immigration rallies in the past where the whole entire crowd was like Latinx and maybe like Arab, Middle Eastern, but there was like no black people, and there was like not even any discussion of black people, of black immigrants, of black refugees, of the way that, all these type of policies are going to affect us. And then you also have some black people that when you start talking about these issues, they say like, well, I don't understand why you care, because like this shit doesn't affect black people. I'm like, no, it does affect black people. Like, black immigrants exist. Black Muslims exist. Black refugees exist. This shit is going to fucking impact black lives. Like, what are y'all talking about? Like, all this shit is gonna impact black lives. Like, this shit should matter to you if you're black, I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and when somebody says black Muslims, and when somebody says Muslim immigrants, I think of black Muslims. I think of black Ethiopians. That's like really what I think of. I think of black Ethiopians. My whole life, all the Muslims that I ever knew were black Ethiopians. All the immigrants that I ever knew were black Ethiopians until I got older and I left DC and I moved to New York. And even then, I started meeting a lot of West Indians that were immigrants, Guyanese people that were immigrants, Jamaicans that were immigrants, but I still like knew black Muslims, black immigrants, refugees from countries in Africa like Sudan, war-torn countries that came here. These measures affect black people. These measures affect black lives. So it's like really interesting to see this erasure of, black people from this narrative around Muslims and immigrants and refugees, on a mainstream level, as well as on like a pro-black level, where you have these fucking hoteps that say, well, I don't understand why you fucking care. I put a post on Instagram. Somebody had a protest sign that said Syrian refugees have killed less people in, the years since 9/11 than Dylan Roof killed in 14 minutes. Now, the point of that sign was to point out white terrorism, which I have talked about on this channel before, on White Male Rage, white domestic terrorism. You are more likely to be killed by a white domestic terrorist, probably a right-wing fucking Christian, in the United States on U.S. soil than you are to be killed by any other terrorist group. Okay, so the point of that sign was pointing out how racism, white supremacy is like the real fucking terrorism. So if we're gonna ban anybody, we need to ban white people. We need to illegalize motherfucking white people, which again, I have talked about on this channel before because I have talked about white male rage. If you haven't seen that video, please check it out. So I put that post on Instagram, and I put the caption I put was like illegalize white, like illegalize white people, ban them. And people started arguing in the comment section about, oh, you're supposed to be pro-black. Why are you posting about Syrians? Syrians don't give a shit about you. Why you care about them? I was like, number one, y'all are missing the point. Like, the point is about white domestic terrorism. Like, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about how white people, they wage a war on terror. They wage a war on drugs. You know, how the very same white supremacist rhetoric that tells you that all Muslims are terrorists, that's the same white supremacist rhetoric that tells you that all black people are criminals and black people can be fucking Muslims. The same white supremacist rhetoric that tells you that all Latinx are fucking rapists is the same white supremacist rhetoric that tells you that all black people are thugs and fucking in gangs and black people can be Latinx. Like, all this shit. It was Holocaust Remembrance Day the other day, and they talking about they're gonna remove Jews because other people died too, which is that all lives matter shit. When black people were telling you that all lives matter was some fucked up shit to say, and y'all were calling us crazy, and now here we are, and they're doing the same thing to other marginalized groups. But you have some people that's like, well, I don't care about Jews. Black people can be Jews also. When I was in college, I knew a black girl that was a Jew. Her name was fucking Sarah Nay. Like, black people can be Jewish also. Like, the same white supremacist rhetoric that says, I don't give a fuck about Jews, says they don't give a fuck about black people either. So I find it really interesting how you have people that are supposedly, you know, and to me, this is kind of like similar to white feminism. It like links back to white feminism in a way. You have people that are quote unquote pro-black, but yet they still regurgitate white supremacist rhetoric against other groups. I don't want to regurgitate no type of white supremacist rhetoric about anybody. I want to dismantle the system of fucking racism, white supremacy. And so me doing my part as a black person to dismantle that means I cannot regurgitate that white supremacist rhetoric against other groups. And the reason why I said that kind of reminds me of, like, you know, going back to white feminism is you have a lot of people that pretend to be pro-black or quote unquote pro-black, but they really don't want to dismantle the system of racism, white supremacy. They just want to get that white boot off of their neck. They don't really give a fuck about how that shit is impacting other people. Just like how you have white feminists that don't really want to fucking have rights for women. They just want to get the boot of the patriarchy off their neck as a white person. And it's like, no, if you're trying to dismantle systems of white supremacy, that shit is going to affect other marginalized groups. And if you are not comfortable with that, then you're not really trying to dismantle the system of racism, white supremacy. And that's just how I feel about that. And last but not least, I also wanted to get into the erasure of indigenous peoples as well as African Americans, which I think I've come to the conclusion, and I've talked about this a little bit on Twitter, and I will definitely be making a video about this at some point. I feel like African American is an ethnicity, and I also feel like we are indigenous to the United States of America because African Americans, African slaves were here pre-Revolutionary War, which means that, you know, during the official formation of this fucking country, we predated that. So we were already here when this country was formed. So African Americans, in a way, are indigenous to this country. And then you have indigenous peoples, the indigenous peoples of North America, the continent, which includes indigenous tribes in Canada, indigenous tribes in Mexico. And you have these slogans going around about how, like, we are all immigrants. Share your immigrant story, you know, share where your people came from and your roots and your generations. And that is an erasure. That is an erasure of indigenous peoples, including African Americans, Native Americans, the indigenous peoples of fucking Canada, the indigenous peoples of Mexico. We are not immigrants. And what that really does is it centers, you know, a white colonist narrative. Oh, we are all immigrants. America is a nation of immigrants. America was built by immigrants. No, America was built by slaves that were not immigrants. They were kidnapped and forcibly brought over here, all right? And America was also built on the genocide of fucking Native Americans that were also not immigrants. They were already here. Saying that we are all immigrants and America is a nation of immigrants inherently centers this white colonist fucking narrative of that this was just an empty piece of land, and the amazing, wonderful, benevolent white people, came over here and built it from the ground up. And then, moving forward with Staten Island and the Statue of Liberty and the Eastern Europeans coming over here, it's just more of this like manifest destiny, American exceptionalism. And we're all like, no, number one, we're not all immigrants. African Americans are not immigrants, and we are not descended from immigrants. We're descended from people that were kidnapped and were forcibly brought over here. Indigenous peoples are not immigrants. They were already here. Again, we have to stop centering white people. Stop centering this colonist fucking perspective that this was just an empty place that white people built up. And then I said this on Twitter too, that even being able to trace, your roots and your genealogy and trace it back generations and have this story of like where you came from and how you came over here to be a doctor and shit like that. There's like some classism there, and there's like some privilege there, because again, you have people like African Americans that the vast majority of us don't know our roots. We can't trace our story back generations. We have that history stripped from us, And I've been in spaces, in activist spaces, where they say, we're going to talk about our roots and we're going to talk about, what grounds us in our activism. And the other African Americans that were there in the room were like, well, we don't really have that, so maybe don't erase us in that way, So, and there was just like a lot of that going around, and that's literally erasure. So, and really what I think all these topics address is intersectional protest methods, right? I feel like that's going to be like the slogan for 2017 is like intersections. Like, what are the intersections here? Because now we're talking about intersectional protest methods. We're talking about, are you aware of Black Muslims? Are you aware of Black immigrants? Are you aware of Black refugees? Are you aware that your protest methods are culturally appropriative? Are you aware that, the things that you're saying, your protest slogans and shit like that are erasing Indigenous peoples and African Americans? And those are intersections, right? These are intersectional protest methods. So especially as protest kind of is basically going mainstream, these are things that I think we need to start talking about and having conversations about. So I'm probably going to just have a ton of Twitter links in the description box, because we were literally talking about all this stuff all day yesterday. So please click on those links. I might do another video later where I just like straight up like read some of the conversations we were having. Clearly I can't read them now because I was in the car, so this is kind of just like a recap. Let me know what you guys think in the description box. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Food for thought as always. See you guys next time. Car video. Peace.